Welcome to the Engage and Empower podcast. Behind every successful company is an intentional and innovative approach to empowering your most valuable asset, your people. Join me in having conversations with people and talent leaders as we share our journeys and unpack what it takes to build strong, cohesive teams and employee experiences. From executives at early-stage startups to innovators at large public companies, we'll capture the compelling stories of the people behind people teams. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to the Engage and Empower podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I am so excited to be chatting with the VP of People at Wistia, Jane Jaxon. Jane and I met a number of years ago just through networking through the people and talent community in Boston, and I've always left every conversation with something to think about. So today, I'm really looking forward to chatting with you, Jane. Thanks so much for making time for the show. It's been a minute, so I'm looking forward to catching up and hearing about all that you've been up to. If you wouldn't mind getting us started by giving listeners just a quick background and intro on you, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It certainly has been a minute. I am Jane. I am the VP over at Wistia. It is about 120 people. It is the sweet spot that I really enjoy for culture building and team building and systems building. Before that, I've been at a couple of similar companies, Playster and Buildium, and I just really am impassioned about creating great teams that also really mesh up with the business goals and trying to create really equitable and fair workplaces.
I love that. You have tons of experience scaling and growing and leading startups. But even going way back before your days in HR, you started in the alternative medicine education space and then transitioned into the people world. So would love to hear more about that story. Tell us what initially drew you to that space and then what piqued your interest in transitioning into people and culture.
Yeah, it certainly was an interesting journey, and I didn't know that this was going to be the end destination. But I graduated college with a degree in neuroscience and psychology and decided, okay, I need to go to grad school. So I enrolled in a great program at BU and made it about a semester in and was like, I don't belong in the lab and I don't really want to be a psychologist. So I'm not sure what my journey is. And I ended up just kind of looking for a role where I felt like I could be autonomous and learn from some great people, and found it at the New England School of Acupuncture in kind of the registrar's office. And so I was in academic affairs there, and basically, we had a controller leave and needed somebody to do HR. And I was really interested in it. I've kind of geeked out about some companies in general. Netflix is a great example. And I thought that I could make a difference in how people experience work, which is such a huge part of their lives. And, unfortunately, the school needed to kind of cut costs. So it's not the positive side of HR, and you're making a lot of tough decisions. And also not able to do the really progressive things that I had been reading about and geeking out about, and decided that it was time to look for a role in an industry that was more progressive than education typically is, and found one in tech at Buildium at 22 people, and really felt empowered to take some of these ideas I had been working through in my head and things other companies were doing and apply them to really a growing and developing culture and workplace. And I was really hooked after that experience.
Nice. I love hearing people's stories because I find that a lot of us just kind of fall into it. And your story is actually really similar to mine. I too actually graduated with a degree in psychology, ended up working in a lab, didn't know if I could see myself doing that forever, wanted to work in a role where I was empowering other individuals and kind of helping people figure out what their career path was, and was also drawn to tech because I felt like there was a lot of investment in the people function and an understanding around how critical enabling and empowering your employees are to your broader success. And so love hearing that. I know that, in your past three companies, you've joined in a people leadership role. early on. And I imagine that, or part of that initial onboarding is really getting to know the organization and where you feel like you want to provide the most support. So, in your experiences, have you found that you see similar pain points across each organization that you have supported? So, you feel like you're at a point where it's kind of a plug and play as an HR leader as you're joining a growing startup? Or did your approach really differ with each organization you're a part of? And it was more of a unique puzzle each time?
For me, I think it's been more of a unique puzzle each time. I read about this model that really I learned a lot from, which is the STARS model. And it's basically every company is in one of five stages: it's in startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, or I think it's sustained growth is the final S. And the needs of every organization differ based on what stage you're in as a company. And so I think that's been helpful because I think as you enter any company, part of your job in HR is you may have been sold, hey, we're in this stage, but you need to actually understand if that's really the case. And I think you also need to look at different departments, including the department you're joining, and figure out, is this like a turnaround HR outfit? Is this a startup that's never existed before? And through that lens, every position I've started at has been slightly different. And what I find helpful is kind of going in with an open mind, trying to understand and suss out what stage an organization and a team are in. And then that helps you kind of figure out what your priorities need to be. So, a startup, for example, which is what I was entering at Buildium, there was really no systems whatsoever. So that's like an easy thing to tick off. Whereas, joining Wistia, the systems were like incredibly advanced, and I really didn't need to focus on, putting tool sets in. It was certain functions of HR needed a little boost and revamp. So it's really been very different. And I think sitting down with people and understanding their pain points as your stakeholders helps you understand what your priorities need to be.
I think that totally makes sense. But for listeners that may not be familiar with Wistia, can you give us a sense of what Wistia is all about? How large is the team? And also, how large was the people team when you started?
Yeah, so Wistia right now is about 125 people. We were, I think, 85 when I started 2 years ago. And I entered Wistia as a person without a team. So now we are a team of four, but we were just me, which I think a lot of HR leaders are brought in and really starting from scratch. And you're trying to be strategic and also trying to, sign people up for benefits and make sure payroll is a-okay and all that fun stuff. We do a whole bunch of different things, but I think most folks know us for our, video suite of products, whether it's, hosting or also the marketing components of it. We have another product called Soapbox, which is for video creation, and it makes it really easy for people to create it and embed it and send it, which is great when you're trying to do like a personal touch pretty quickly without wanting to get into editing tools. And then most recently, we just released a podcasting tool, which has a lot of cool analytics for marketers to really understand their audience and what's kind of engaging people and how they're connecting with their audiences.
Nice. Well, I'll definitely have to check that out as I continue my podcast journey. But it sounds like you really built the team from the ground up. As you sort of got started at Wistia and started building new programs, building out your teams, what are some programs that you feel like you're particularly proud of or that you think have been the most impactful as you've grown and supported the team there?
So at Wistia, I'm super proud right now of a few things, but one is really what we've done with the hiring process to really align with our DE&I efforts. And we really built it from the ground up so that we are really deliberate about what we're looking for and what doesn't matter in candidates to kind of eliminate some bias that happens there. We're really thoughtful about everything from our interview plan and who our interviewers are to the questions we're asking and the answers we're looking for before we even sit down with candidates. So we have sort of an objective norm and can mitigate bias on that end of things. And then we've also put in a lot of work to bring in a more diverse audience to our listings. And, I think we've started to see some really positive results, both in terms of the amazing people we've been able to bring on over the last couple of years. And also the profiles of those people coming in is changing, which is really exciting to me. And then this year, we've done a lot around, again, trying to build diversity, equity, and inclusion into our career framework. So we really articulated what it takes to get to different levels at Wistia so people know what they're expected to do. And so we're more equitably able to evaluate folks. And again, all this is with an eye of trying to mitigate bias wherever we can and make things more objective and transparent to folks, also so we can be held accountable and really, make sure that it's serving what we're trying to do and we're not letting bias really impact that process the way that happens if you're not really deliberate about it. So we just released that a couple of months ago, and it'll be interesting to see what we learn over the first year and how we can refine it to make it better. But I'm really excited about the clarity that should give people in terms of what is expected and the clarity on, frankly, their career and their development at Wistia.
Yeah, totally. I think it's so important to take a holistic approach to diversity, equity, and belonging, as you just kind of mentioned, in terms of how you're thinking about identifying what the core competencies or skills and attributes are that you're looking for in any given candidate, all the way to, once they've gotten in the door and they're doing really well, how do you give them a clear understanding of how you think about career development and empowering them to kind of take the lead on their own growth? I know it's something that you've invested really early on in at Wistia. So when you think about really capturing that feeling of inclusion or that feeling of belonging, something that's a little bit different than, sourcing and really diversifying your pipeline and things like that. When you think about capturing those feelings internally, what do you feel like that really comes down to?
I saw this question when you wrote it out, and it's tough to answer. Like, I think it means different things to different people. And that's also what makes this work really important, but also very hard. And
Right.
so for us, what we've tried to do is identify some questions that can highlight if we're moving in the right direction or not. So we do have questions on a survey that we send out twice a year that focus on, for example, do you feel able to bring your full self to work? Do you feel comfortable expressing dissenting opinion? And I think, you know, in a vacuum, that doesn't answer the question, but when you kind of put it together with, you know, if people feel able to grow and you slice that up by demographics, I think it gives you a sense of if you're heading in a more inclusive and belonging oriented direction. But I don't actually have the answer for that. I think we're still learning the ways in which we need to improve, as well as some of the things that we're doing well. And I think a great barometer of that for us is, in this fully remote environment, we're fortunate and we're hiring people, getting feedback on how quickly people feel a part of the team and feel comfortable being themselves with the team. And we get that through some of our onboarding surveys and then just anecdotal feedback. I think that's also a good barometer for change when you kind of look at in the past how quickly people felt that feeling versus now. And it gives you some ideas on if you're going the right direction or you're not going the right direction. But I don't think we're ever going to get to the finish line where everyone feels that and we feel like we can do it in X amount of time. It's just trying to keep tweaking it the best that you can.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. There definitely are not five different things that probably are the perfect formula to inclusion, but really getting that pulse and asking those questions and gathering feedback, I think is a really great way of just getting a sense of how people are feeling and what is moving the needle and where, you may want to focus a little bit more. as you have started gathering that feedback and piloting some of these programs, or even in the point where you were designing and thinking about, what you wanted to prioritize, was there anything that you learned about inclusion and belonging, or anything that you learned about fostering an environment where everyone feels like they can be their best self at work, that you found particularly compelling, that you think could serve other companies as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that stands out about Wistia when you're a new person, myself included when I joined Wistia, is I felt like even in my role, which, HR can sometimes be treated a little bit different, a little bit at arm's length. I felt even in my role, people welcomed me and valued what I could bring to the organization. And so I think going into us focusing more and more on DE&I work, I felt like the inherent, this isn't the best terminology, but like the inherent goodness of the collective at Wistia was almost the most important lever for us. And I still think it's important. But one of the things that we have learned, or I have learned, is when things do come up, whether it's, a microaggression or just kind of, you know, two people seeing things very differently, the importance of having an articulated way of addressing those things. So people don't need to feel the weight of deciding if and how to address it. And they don't have to worry about what expectations the person receiving the feedback will have or how they will take it. If it is articulated, hey, you're going to get feedback at Wistia, here's how we expect it to occur. Sometimes it may come from a close peer who's relaying it for somebody else because they don't feel comfortable. Sometimes it may be from, the person who was impacted, but what we expect of people is to listen and to respect the other person's point of view and how we kind of work through the learning, and that will all make mistakes. I think just learning how important it is to not rely on kind of this general feeling of Wistia's culture, but to articulate that and the weight that that takes off of, you know, equity seeking groups who always feel this, I would count myself in this group at various times in my career. You feel this, should I say something? What's going to be the reaction? It's really scary for me to surface this, woman centric issue
Mhm.
in a group of men, how important that like tool is as you look to become a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive and belonging, obviously, organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. As we have shifted to working more distributedly, how has this shown up? I imagine the conversations are obviously a lot different when, there's a group of people together, or there's a one-on-one, hey, I have something to share. Whether it's this giving and receiving feedback when somebody notices something, or whether it's the ways that you've looked to continue to foster that inclusion and belonging, especially as we've moved to a more distributed world. How has that changed, and what have you learned there?
I mean, 2020 has been hard for everyone, and it's just been a constant learning curve that doesn't stop. I think what we've learned is we have to be very deliberate about communicating the cultural norms, about creating opportunities for folks to connect, and meeting everyone where they are. So I think, I can't really say if the tone of conversations across the organization has changed or we're better addressing things or not definitively, because I think, many folks, what they can do right now is they can just do their job and they're engaging with the culture in different ways because their kids are home or they're sharing a small space with two roommates and they're exhausted or they're, anxious about what's going on in the world. So I think folks engaging at various levels in our culture has been a learning, and learning that that's totally okay. We have a very like distinct culture at Wistia that's really hard to put into words. And it certainly changed a little bit remotely. And I think also we've just had to be very deliberate with how we bring new people in. And I think we've added 35 people this year. And it's no longer something we can just rely on people in the kitchen to introduce themselves and welcome people in and make them feel appreciated. We have to be much more thoughtful about that. And so I just think our approach to bringing people into the culture, talking about our norms has changed a little bit and become much more of an effort that we're still learning how to do in this COVID world where folks just have a lot going on and you can't expect the same level of engagement with a workplace because there's just way more going on and it's frankly much of it is more important than work.
Right. Kind of speaking to that, I'm sure you've, observed changes in the ways that employees work. Maybe they're working longer, or maybe they're communicating differently, or, maybe there have been rapid changes in the roadmap for a given team. How have you supported employees through a lot of those changes that, are compounding, obviously, the adjustments that everyone's making around the pandemic? From the people side, like, how have you kind of stepped in and helped the teams there?
I think that Wistia, I'm super proud of this. So before kind of the pandemic was a big thing in the US, our founders pulled together a task force. I think, well, there were 5 of us, and we started talking and preparing for worst case scenarios in February. So by March, we were, put in a position where we needed to decide if we were going to go forward with a ski event for the entire company. And it was very early March. So the risk level was there, but pretty low. And, we spent a lot of time thinking through the human impact of doing it versus canceling it, and then the communication and making sure people had the data that they needed to decide if they wanted to attend or not. And then, frankly, while that event was happening, we did end up holding it. It was up in Vermont. Again, low risk area, pretty rural. Things got they started getting pretty bad in the US, or they started turning in the wrong direction. And because we had invested upfront in thinking about our different options, we made the call to close the office. I think it was probably like March 2nd or 3rd, and to do whatever we could to help people get set up. And at the time, you think it's just for a little bit. But what was great about having this task force of 5 people from different functions, we were meeting 3 times a week. We were sharing information and sorting through kind of the noise for the actual data. And I think that we did a great job arming people with the things they needed to make decisions about their own personal risk level, because unfortunately this became a very politicized situation. We were able to do things like support people building out their home offices. We were able to do things like securing masks when they were really hard to find by working with a local business that made them for us, and really tried to do things that helped our people feel a little bit safer and have one less thing to worry about. I think there are other things we did, like encouraging people to take time off. Even something as simple in Slack, a couple of folks on our ops team changed our default kind of away things to destigmatize things like, hey, I'm parenting right now. It's like an auto thing in Slack. And I think that makes a difference because you don't need to go in and type it. It's like an expected thing for a huge portion of our workforce.
Yeah.
So, really, I think the things that we did well is give people the information they needed. I think we did a really good job being very clear about the flexibility we could provide and acknowledging that this was a lot to handle. And for some people, they needed to be head down and do nothing but work, so they didn't need to think about it. And for some people, they needed to take time off here and there because it was just too much. And so, again, getting back to this, you need to meet people where they are. And I think that because we thought about this ahead of time and tried to stay ahead of it, we were able to do that better than most organizations.
100%. And in light of, everything that you've shared, I think it's definitely both an exciting and also trying time for people and talent professionals in the sense that, there's so many ways to make an impact. There's so many ways to do something innovatively. But at the same time, there are all these moving targets. Things are ever changing. So I'm curious, what is your advice to growing people and talent professionals? What is it that you wish you had known when you had started this journey? What have you learned?
I think what's interesting is you were talking about these like two different ways of people approaching building a people team. This approach of let's do it early and invest early that you see more typically with people who've, founded a few companies and potentially learned the hard way that they need to do this sooner. And then you see companies that, you'll be 200 people deep and have information in Excel spreadsheets versus systems because they didn't make an investment. I think there's like this third category, which is really interesting to me and I haven't figured out, which is, people who invest really early in the function, but don't actually give it a voice. So it's like they saw, in ink or something that they need to invest in this early, but they don't totally understand why they need to invest. And so it's kind of a side function that isn't strategically used. It's not strategically important until it's too late. And I kind of, you never know when you're joining a company unless you really dig in with the founders how important they see the function and if you'll be a partner or if you'll just be an operational sort of cog. Because I think they're really successful. Obviously, we're a biased audience here, but I think the successful companies see that like our job is to really understand how to make this business successful and the people successful. And so that's our expertise. And it's weird and it's gray. And sometimes it's harder to explain or it doesn't have the metrics of sales. But like the founders that get it, that understand how important knowing your people and knowing how they work and how they work together and being deliberate about that, those are the founders as an HR person that you want to find and work for because those are the people who are going to trust you, who are going to let you try, the new idea that you have that you think will be really good for the business for XYZ reasons. They won't necessarily have you in a playbook. You'll be in the room when you're making big decisions. And so I think for folks getting into this field, that's like the biggest, I think, career engagement advice I could give is find founders who really understand that your role may be really hard to explain and there's so much nuance and gray area, but they understand that like you are essential in them navigating growing a successful business.
100%. I could not agree more. And kind of to your point of like, sometimes people do hire people teams early, but that people team might not necessarily have a voice or it might play a more transactional role versus a strategic thought partner role. How did you go about finding those companies that really did value that partnership and the people function? Was it more just like asking the question? Was it more, they're clearly investing this early, or were there other things that you looked for to
I got
gauge that?
totally lucky with Buildium. I didn't know the questions to ask. And honestly, I've said this to both founders. They had like no business giving me the amount of autonomy that they gave me because I really hadn't done this role and the business was growing and everything we were doing was a learning curve for me and the business. But they knew it was important. They invested in my growth. So they invested in an organization called Insight Performance to pair me with a mentor. So the first time we were working through any issue, I could talk to this person and they could walk me through options and we could come to a solution together. And that investment in me is why I'm here doing what I'm doing. They really had no business letting me have autonomy. And I think with when I was looking more recently and evaluating opportunities and found Wistia, I knew that I was looking for people who felt genuine. Michael and Dimitri at Buildium did. And the feeling I got meeting with Chris Savage and Brendan Schwartz here at Wistia, along with the whole, executive team, because I think your peers need to also not be, making it feel like your work is a headwind. They need to value your opinion, value your expertise, value that this can be a very hard job. And so, really, for me, it was meeting with the people I'd be working with, listening to the types of questions that I was being asked in the interview process. And that gave me a sense of like where these folks' priorities were at. So, for example, I did a few interviews that were like super DE&I specific, and that it was in multiple interviews told me that it was genuinely important, not just a buzzword. And this was like, I think I interviewed like close to 3 years ago at this point. It wasn't just a buzzword thing, it was they thought this was important. I got asked a ton of questions about thinking about growth paths and developing different frameworks to build that out at Wistia. I got asked a ton of questions about, how you deal with like failure. And I think what they were trying to get at is they look for a culture of, learning from failure and being open to communicating it versus kind of this, let me make sure nobody sees this, but that causes issues with the business. So it was really just like understand the questions that you're hearing. And once you're done with your interview, reflect back like, what do you think they were trying to get at? And is that the type of organization I want to be at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's dead on when, you're interviewing and you can clearly see that the founders that you're speaking with and the team members that you're speaking with are all kind of singing the same tune of really trying to get a sense of, how you strategically think about supporting the team versus, can you come in and are you qualified to set up our payroll and benefits processes? Those are two very different things. And I think highlight a very different type of partnership. So I think that's critical. Before we wrap, one last question I'd love to ask is, as you've kind of been growing and navigating your way through this field, who inspires you? Are there certain places that you go to or people that you look up to that you find yourself constantly learning from?
I think I generally look at different companies more than individuals. I think Google is always a great testing ground, and learning from all of their insights in terms of analytics and trends. They can do it in a way that I don't think many other companies can. And I've always been super fascinated with some of the ideas and thoughts coming out of Netflix, which is always just willing, again, to experiment and try things differently. So, those are two companies that I obviously try to keep up on the things that they're trying and they're learning. And then there are smaller companies that I think are really fantastic about trying things and sharing their learnings. And it's something we try to do at Wistia in terms of a product level, and probably will try to do more in the talent and culture arena as well. But like, I think Buffer is a great example of a company willing to try things that most HR professionals would be like, I don't know about this. And I think the additional great thing about companies like them and Help Scout, for example, or Basecamp, is they're also willing to share their experience. They're willing to share the things that didn't go well. They're willing to share when they make a mistake. And so, whether we decide to kind of leverage any of what they're learning or leverage what they're doing or not, what is so great about companies like that is their willingness to address like the good and bad and not just put the shiny exterior out there. And so I love kind of keeping up on companies that are trying new things, but are also willing to talk about when things don't go well.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important because it's those times where things don't go well where sometimes there's the most learnings because you can really apply those no matter what scale you are, whether you're a growing startup or a larger company. And I think making that there for others to learn from is really important because we can all win. There's no one winner. And by helping each other out, we are able to help one another get there. So thank you for sharing, your wins and your learnings. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. And it was so fun chatting with you as always. And so thanks for sharing your experiences and the nuggets that you picked up along the way.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy kind of our chats about talent and culture. And so I was really excited about this. So thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe for the weekly drop and feel free to share around with your people and talent colleagues. I'd love your feedback, so please leave a review and let us know what you enjoyed and what types of topics you'd like to see covered in the future. The more reviews and subscribers we get, the more quality content we can consistently deliver to you. If you're interested in being on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me at russica@engageandempower.org. See you next week.